Well, thank you again, everyone, for coming today. We have a cool presentation that I'm looking forward to that I've heard about. Ursula is going to reprise her presentation on navigating difficult situations, and I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I'm Ursula Ruedenberg here at the Pacifica Affiliate Network office, together with Stephanie. We have beautiful May weather, and Joseph, our worries are tornadoes and floods. So far, no tornadoes and floods in Ames, Iowa, but spring is just starting, so we'll see what happens. Right now, lots of bluebells out, lots of flowers, so we're enjoying the brief moment of balmy weather until summer starts. And then it's back to aggravating weather. So anyway, that's Ruth in the background, our business manager. And she's leaving for the day after rescuing me from some devastating technical issues that we're all still recovering from around here.
I too was very surprised.
So if I seem a little bit shook up, it's just because we had a massive rebellion on the part of our machines, but everything's back to normal. Bye-bye.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Ruth is a magician when it comes to machines. So anyway, okay. So thank you for coming to hear me out on this topic. This is a presentation that I made together with Peyton WImmer, who is a psychologist in Texas, Austin, Texas, and has been a great deal of help to me. He studies organizational systems and actually got his start working with severely disturbed children. And so he is uniquely qualified to give advice on community radio. And he developed a lot of these ideas himself and gets full credit really for the ideas. I'm going to share. Probably all of you here know that there are no easy solutions to many problems when people get together to work on a project, especially something as challenging as community radio. And so I can't claim that this presentation solves all the problems, but it does offer some very, very powerful tools that have really helped me a lot in my work, really changed the way I worked. And it's, I would say, based on my experience, that these tools are probably more applicable to people that you are supervising than relationships with people who are above you in the organizational structure. Now, these ideas certainly can be adapted to dealing with people with equal power or more power than you. But I would say the most easy way to apply these is to first think about people that you're supervising, where you have a little bit more power over the situation. Okay, so the origin of this presentation came from the fact that a lot of times when I went to conferences and went to programs about how to, manage kind of the problems that happen in organizations, there was a lot of instruction about what to do when things, when everybody was acting in good faith. And the thing that was troublesome about that is that I think we all know that that breaks down very often, and not everybody is being their best self. And so the question was, what do you do when people are not being their best self? And a lot of times it's very hard to understand why they are doing that. So the idea was, why are they doing those things that sometimes just don't make any sense? Especially, when you as the manager are trying to act with a lot of goodwill and expect everybody to follow suit, and then other things happen. This is just a picture of some of us could be radio folk. This was actually taken here in Ames, Iowa at a grassroots radio conference. And some of you may recognize some of the fine folks that are here. And the person here, this was me when I had black hair. And the person leaning on my shoulder is Peyton, the psychologist who basically created these concepts. Okay, so before getting into that, there's just a general overview because a lot of this is really structural based. It's just some thoughts about organizational structures. So this is the kind of most conventional structure that we all know, which tends to work pretty well, which is one of top-down authority where you have the board of directors on top, the staff, and the volunteers. So there's a very clear chain of command. And I think we all agree this structure can be very helpful in terms of everybody understanding who to communicate with who and who makes what decisions. Other structures that have been very popular in the last, in recent times was the consensus model, where everybody has to come to an agreement together, which has, the benefit of really promoting communication. But a problematic part of that is the issue that the authority is shared by everybody. And so a lot of times confusion gets created around that, and informal power structures get created to, in a sense, bypass the difficulties of shared authority, where nobody knows exactly who has the ultimate accountability for what's happening in the organization. So it comes with its problems. This is another model that kind of came out of the work with Peyton that I really kind of came to see as having a lot of benefits. It doesn't necessarily eliminate the other models, but it raises the other issue, which is that a really strong organization is made up of a lot of unique elements with a core in the middle, which holds it together. And so if you imagine kind of the organizational structure and the ideas and the protocols and the principles that are laid down by the organization as the yellow part of the flower, and then all the white petals as the different parts of the organization, the different people, the different committees, the different groups that have different initiatives and different creative ideas, that they are, seen as being encouraged to develop themselves individually. But the kind of operating principle is they all have to be connected to the central core of principles of the structure of the organization. And that's kind of what holds everything together. Now, this is how most community radio stations look. In other words, it's, most of us are not perfect. A lot of us are works in progress, so we tend to look more like this. We have a lot of imperfections, but ultimately you can end up with something like this. And I know of many stations in our network who actually do function like this. They're well-oiled machines that encourage individuality, diversity, but are held solidly together by a core guiding structure, which keeps them connected and in sync with each other. So this is kind of an ideal, but it's entirely possible because I see it happening in many stations, that they get to this point as they mature under leadership. One of the things about all this is that I think we've all learned the hard way is that culture ultimately is the trump in all of this. It's the ruling. It is much stronger than structure, actually, that culture is often not clear to everybody. It's often invisible, unspoken, but ultimately it pretty much drives everything. So it is worth thinking about what is your culture, and it's worth cultivating a culture that is functional. This is a little diagram that Peyton once meant, where you have, like, here you have the station management, and then over here you have the individual engagement, and when these two meet here, that's where, you know, the power of your organization is, which is another way of saying the same thing the DAISY structure had, is when you have the structure of the station encountering the individual initiatives, that's where you start to have real power in your organization. And so it's just something to keep in the back of one's mind, and to keep an eye on culture, because it's gonna make things happen one way or the other. And I think we all see that today in the United States as well, how much culture is driving things right now. So the question is, how does good culture happen? And because a lot of times we end up with this down below, which is a drawing made by Picasso. But I think it very well describes many of the situations that I've experienced in running a community radio station. And I think we all know this moment when it feels like this. So the answer is, why are they doing that? The main answer is the issue of vulnerability and the search for safety that almost everybody is engaged on some level. These are some of the issues that are constantly swimming. Is like, this is an individual, and then all around them are all these issues that are going through their minds, that they're not friendly enough, they're not thin enough, they're not interesting enough, they're not perfect. Everybody has this kind of stuff swimming around their head all the time, or at least most of us do. There's a few lucky individuals who don't go through this kind of insecurity, but the truth is most people do. And these are some of the reasons why in community radio this happens. Community radio tends to be uncharted waters. We are not dealing with a type of institution that we learn through the popular culture in the United States. Most of us, have been raised in a capitalist society where exploitation and kind of use of resources are taken for granted, and the ideal of community radio, of bringing people together as humans to make something beautiful, is a risky proposition, because we don't have a lot of models for it. And so most people in your community will be asking themselves the question, is it safer for me to be in this group or out of this group? You know, is it safer for me to be against it or for it? And most people are, to some degree, I mean, until they become really deeply involved with your station, or the people, observing your station, are going to be asking that question. And most people are flying blind. They have very little experience with this type of enterprise. And it just happens that in community radio, there is a very, very high bar. We have huge legal, financial, reputation. I mean, we're doing this all out in the open. We need to be accepted by our communities. We require great creativity from ourselves and the people at the station. And we have to meet a high bar. We have no choice. We have legal obligations. We have to raise the money. None of this stuff, community radio is an activity that is requires a lot. And people feel that, and they don't know if they can or want to rise to the occasion. And the other part of that is that there's constant new frontiers. So there's a steep learning curve. Most people are lay people. They have not been trained in radio. And I think all of you know that the thing about community radio is there's always a new frontier. This is a process that never solidifies and stops. There's always something new to learn and to engage with. And in a way, that's the exciting thing about community radio, because it never stops being a growth experience, but that scares a lot of people. Scares almost all of us. I know I've been scared running a radio station almost all the time. Most of us think we're just not good enough. It's just kind of a fact that the majority of the people, very few are the lucky people who have no doubts about themselves. There's also some kind of really interesting facts that are not as obvious, but are definitely operating here. One is that success is fragile by nature. I know there's kind of a mythology that people don't like success because it's threatening, and the real reason for that is because we all intuitively know that success is fragile. It requires certain conditions, and that success can disappear on us very quickly, and that makes people very nervous for good reasons. And that sets off feelings of a lot of vulnerability. In contrast, and this is a little bit counterintuitive, but dysfunction actually does not feel fragile. It feels very, very stable. And so people seek safety often by employing and maintaining dysfunctional systems. And they're doing it because of the stability that they get from that, because it makes them feel stable. When you're dysfunctional, it doesn't feel like a lot's happening, and that feels more stable than the fragility of success. So, in other words, there's a lot of people a lot of reasons to feel vulnerable when you're engaging in community radio. And I think as a good manager, it's important to remember that that's an underlying dynamic that's happening. So this is like a little diagram that Peyton made at one point, which are kind of different ways that dysfunction can manifest itself, like the strategies that people will employ to create dysfunction for inner stability. And we're going to talk about a few of these. Some of them are kind of obvious here. And I'm not going to go into the misapplied strength one. That's kind of an interesting idea that Peyton brought up, that that very talented people will use their talent to be very creative about dysfunction and use it for that purpose. And in a way, people that are very creative at dysfunction are people that have a lot of strengths. And if there's any way that we can bring them over to the functional side, they can be a real asset. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. This is kind of like a scary set of things. I think they're strategies that I have certainly seen used many, many times in the station that I was managing. But the nice thing about it is that when you're able to build a good structure, really nothing can come bad of that. And so you can really overcome a lot of these functions. If you are able to build a good structure, it will kind of withstand a lot of this kind of monkey business that goes on. If you build a bad structure that's based on this kind of behavior, there's just no good will come of it. It will just, it'll really kind of take you down eventually. So I'm going to look at a few of these that I think are more interesting and actually most common and most powerful. The first one that I wanted to talk about was the strategy called power of noncompliance. And this is like an enemy that I think we all have experienced all the time. So what is power of noncompliance? I mean, I think it kind of speaks for itself, but in daily working together with people, the most, the most easy way to get that kind of power is just to say no to everything. And a lot of times the reason why people say no is because, I mean, you're kind of, when you're doing that, you're kind of going back to what, about 2 or 3 years old, which is when you start to learn to say no. And the reason why you say no so much is because when you say that, you experience the power of frustrating the other person, and you know that they want something from you, and you're able to deny that. That gives you a moment of power. It's not very lasting, but it does give you that. An example that I experienced when I was managing KHOI here in Ames, it was very, very interesting. About the first year that we're on the air, we did not have a studio, so we had to literally deliver all of our content on a flash drive to the tower every day, at least once, if not twice, to get it on the air. We put it into an automation system out at the tower, and until we got a connection. And the interesting thing, so we had like a whole organized team of people that would load up this content and bring it out to the tower. And the interesting thing was that when I made like a spreadsheet, which in a sense, organized how to do this, people rebelled. They refused to use the spreadsheet. They wanted to do everything by memory, which was really impossible to do because, a full days of programming, you have to have some sort of documentation to keep it all straight. But for a very long time, people just refused to do it. And there really was no reason to not do it other than the fact that it was just an opportunity for them to say no to something. And I think that's how they were dealing with the stress of what was a pretty difficult operation, really. But it was fascinating to me that people were so opposed to a simple spreadsheet. Another very common form of power of noncompliance that I think all of us have had at some point is somebody wants to do a project, they start doing the project, and when you say, wait a minute, what, what are you doing? They will accuse you of micromanaging them. And another way that people will say, well, I thought you wanted me to do this, even though they didn't check with you. And very often people will get on a soapbox and start to feel that they're very right about something that goes against the organization, and reject protocols, which is kind of what I was referring to before with the spreadsheet of just trying to make some sort of protocol to keep things in order. And people will reject those. And why do they do it? Because they get that moment of control, which gives them a sense of power and reassurance. It's almost never long lasting because usually it doesn't work. And so the real, we all know the term loose cannon, somebody who goes off and does something by themselves. The real danger of that is that not so much. I mean, sometimes people can be really destructive when they do that. Although a lot, they'll go out and say something on behalf of the station, or they'll, and that can be destructive. But the main reason why it's really destructive is because when they do that, they're not working through the structure of the station, and what they do just will not work. You can't do it that way. It has to. They don't have the agency of the organization behind them, and usually they'll end up wasting a lot of their own time and everybody else's time. And it's a really great way to lose a great volunteer, is for them to have 1 or 2 experiences like that, and then they'll be frustrated, and you've kind of lost the talent and the energy that they could have offered. I mean, one of the things that I just really learned in this was to not be intimidated by the term you're micromanaging with me, because I mean, it is true that there is such a thing as micromanaging people, but asking somebody to comply with the protocols and the, the communication system within an organization is not micromanaging. It's protecting them and everybody else in what they do so that they actually have the power to do something. So I just kind of learned to not be intimidated by that language. Another very, very common strategy, and this is a little bit less intuitive, a little bit less obvious, but really, really important, is the issue of borrowed authority. And it's kind of a deep concept, which you may or may not have already thought through, but it kind of gets down to a person's sense of, I don't know if I want to use, personal power, but empowerment, I think, is a more neutral word, a sense of their own balance and ability to really do something and overcome their own anxiety about doing risky things. If you don't feel really, really centered in yourself, which very few people actually do when they're confronted with a difficult and new project like a community radio station, they will look for some place to find that sense of power outside of themselves. And so they will very often identify themselves with status, money, celebrity. They'll talk about, how much money they have, or who they know, or give themselves an important, like when I came to Ames back in 2010, and I was asked to build KHOI, it was amazing. Everybody, and there was like all these people that had already assigned themselves titles at the station, and the station didn't even exist yet. But people would say to me, well, I'm the program director, and I'm the, this and that. And it's like, well, there's not even a station yet. So, I'm sorry, you're not yet. First we have to have a radio station before we start giving ourselves titles, because titles are not going to build a radio station. And another very, very, very common, one of the biggest things to watch out for is triangulation. And you may or may not, have been thinking about that. Essentially, triangulation is when you pick sides with somebody against somebody else. And what that really is borrowed authority. They're saying, well, because I'm with this person, we have power now. And triangulation is like the instant way to undermine yourself and everybody else around you. It's a basic kind of reality of human energy, is that when you triangulate, you will inevitably end up being the enemy of the person that you ganged up with. It's almost impossible to avoid that, because the act of triangulation sets a dynamic in motion that is absolutely fascinating, but completely predictable, that you will eventually end up fighting with the person that you aligned you made into your ally. And so the important thing as a manager is to see that when somebody is doing that, to understand that they are afraid, and that's why they're triangulating. Another way to borrow authority is stand on a soapbox, pick an issue that's your issue, and just like, Pacifica National Board is famous for that. People just picking an issue and then just like being relentless about being the expert on that. And then you have, the ugly factor of people becoming tyrannical and raging. And rage is a form of borrowed authority. It's a way of, feeling a level of entitlement and righteousness that makes you feel strong. And the kind of more like Peyton comes up with these kind of really deep concepts, and which are important, which is the underlying fact that the borrowed authority is happening because the kind of basic assumption is it doesn't have really its own power source. You know, it's not coming from a real place of connection to creativity and confidence. It's coming as a strategy against fear. And so it's always looking for somewhere else for power. And that's a fact that is really worth meditating on for a long time, because that activity of seeking power elsewhere is really the cause of a lot of problems. So when people's sense of vulnerability rises to a certain level, then it becomes volatile. And that's when you have a crisis, some sort of crisis of management. So I asked Peyton to come up with some solutions for what to do. I mean, kind of the first part of the presentation is really designed to try to identify some of the reasons of why these things get to the point, and there's a few things that Peyton has suggested to address them when it happens. And I will tell you, I have used these, and they are very, very powerful. It actually does work. The only caveat is that we all want to be right. And we all want to be, especially us managers, want to be, well, everybody wants to be acknowledged for the good work and the good effort that they bring to it. And the hard truth is that when you're a manager, you hardly ever get that. Every once in a while, somebody gives you that, but most of the time you don't get it. And it's just a fact that it's your job as a manager to live with that. So these solutions are humble. It's a humble process. It's a form of service. So when you've got a crisis, somebody's blowing up on you, these are steps you can take to kind of get yourself kind of in a place where you can step out of your own ego and not get I mean, our egos all get hooked. And as we all know, egos are it's a very fragile and self-serving part of our personalities that usually don't know what's really going on. We just have a certain goal, which is we want to feel better. So this kind of helps you step away from that and be a little bit more of a productive manager. So first, just recognize that when people be volatile, they are expressing a vulnerability and something's on the line for them. And then try to learn what the person is expressing. And try to see that if there's a weakness in the structure that's possibly affecting not only them, but everybody. So you're kind of, being in a position of willingness to learn from this, not just try to stop it, but also learn from it. And that's usually said between the lines. It's usually not articulated directly, but your organization, you're able to look at it and put it in perspective. And then this is a little bit of a counterintuitive part. You have to assume neutrality, and which means you have to sit down. You can't meet them with a powerful presence. And I remember seeing that really beautifully illustrated when I used to work for the City of New York, Department of Parks and Recreation. And I had an employee once who started to sexually harass me. He got really, really volatile and aggressive, and actually decided at some point that I need to be fired because I wasn't responding the way he would like me to him. And in those days, it was a union job. So I went to my supervisor at the Department of Parks. Actually, he wasn't my supervisor. He was the head of operations at Parks. And I had never liked him particularly much, but I brought this to him and he really showed me how this was done. He was amazing. He was a very big man, but when we came in the room and this guy was all over the place, strutting around, puffing his chest out, this and that. What this guy did was he immediately sat down behind his desk and only spoke to him from a sitting down position. And I asked him about that afterwards, and he did. I mean, he fired the guy. And I had never seen, he was really good. But I asked him afterwards about that, and he said, well, I'm pretty sure if I had stood up, the guy would have taken a swing at me. And so that was kind of the most dramatic illustration I've ever seen of this concept of you got to sit down and do not act powerful. And the reason for that is very counterintuitive. Dysfunction looks for power because it's looking for power to borrow, as we said before. It doesn't have its own power. So if you indicate that you are the powerful person in the organization, that person will keep gravitating to you and fight with you because they want to engage with that. And so you have to take that away from them. You have to take away this jockeying for power because it's really not the issue. And you just have to take that out of the formula. And do not triangulate to deal with this person. Do not, align yourself with anybody else, or it will inevitably take you down if you do that. And believe me, I've tried, and I know the hard way that you will eventually end up in a bad position if you choose triangulation. It just never, ever works. And you could do a whole workshop just on the woes of triangulation. So long story short, just don't do it. Stand on your own at moments like that. Once having assumed that position, which is a position which can be infuriating internally because it's unfair, but nonetheless, it's your job as a manager to maintain that balance and low profile at a moment like that. And just, if you can, ask what is the concern. And what you're really asking is what's making you afraid. And the best way to do that is reflective listening, which is, I think most of us know what that is, but basically you listen to somebody and then you repeat back to them what you think you heard them say. Maybe not in the exact same words, but kind of conceptually, so that they feel they've been heard. And that can take a while because a volatile person doesn't really want to be understood. They just want to be right. And so it takes a while, but ultimately everybody wants to be heard. Most people, not everybody, but most people. And then try to move to normal behavior, which is, breaking down the situation in relationship to the structure of the organization. So that includes, what could be improved, what kind of communication could be better. Is there a new policy that has to be put in place? These things actually do make a difference to somebody. They can help direct somebody's thinking into, how what they're feeling can be fit into the structure that already exists. And it feels kind of tedious. It feels kind of hopeless at the time, but it actually does make a difference. And, it gets to the bottom. Sometimes if it's really, really volatile, it's better to postpone the discussion and choose the time, if possible, your time, when to talk about this. I'm thinking about a situation where I used this, where we had a show. The morning show was a collective production, and one of the members of the group became extremely aggressive and antagonistic. And I went through this process, and when I asked her to, tell us what was bothering her, she didn't say it in so many words, but what I heard her saying was that she was terrified of being left out. It was like a personal issue for her, that she always feels left out. And when I brought that up and addressed it in a way where it wasn't like, well, I think you're like this, but it was said in a way that made clear that she would not be left out, she burst into tears, and the whole thing just ended right there. So it can work. It's it's not pleasant, and can be really annoying for a manager, but it actually really does work. Well, with most people, like I said, there are always situations where somebody is just absolutely impossible, but I would say the majority of the people are really, going through this type of thing. There's another kind of crisis that can happen that I asked Peyton about, which is a sense of helplessness, when there's a sense that there's a downward spiral happening. That's a different type of crisis, kind of a crisis of discouragement. And a good example is we don't have any money, right? We have to raise money because this and this and this. We have to pay for this and this. That happened with us, and this process does work. And the kind of the internal reason, kind of the operating energy behind this, is that when people start to feel this level of panic and helplessness, they lose their sense of choice. And the sense of choice is really where, people's creative solutions originate. And when they abdicate that, it becomes really scary. So you can do this, and I have done it, and it was amazing. I did this with our board of directors at KHOI. You just stop for a minute, you take time out, and you identify one thing that you do well as a group. And it can be anything, it doesn't matter, just find something and focus on that. And stop thinking about, the ultimate thing that needs to be done. Just focus on what you do well. And then make a plan based on that. And you have to stick to the plan. And you have to understand that continuity is what's going to save you. So, you can make plans and then abandon them because you get scared again. If you stick to the plan, it's amazing how things will kind of develop their own momentum. And you kind of develop this feeling of we're doing the best we can with what we have. And that is really usually a very powerful frame of mind to be in, to allow better things to happen. Because when you get in that frame of mind, it's amazing what things can kind of come to you in unexpected ways. And the way this happened with us at KHOI was we got to a point where we did get very frightened about money. And we felt that we just weren't getting anywhere. And so we did this, we stopped, and we just, okay, for this board meeting, we're not going to talk about money. We're just going to talk about what we think, like what is one thing this group actually can do. And after some discussion, we realized that we were really good at hospitality. We had a beautiful building. We had always had really good parties, and we were always a very welcoming space. So, we're a storefront, so people walk in, and that hospitality was really something we did really, really well. And out of that awareness, we started to raise money. We started to find ways that we could raise money through hospitality. And it really did change the energy in the room. And the interesting thing about this, and this is kind of, more of an energetic thing, when you start doing one thing, all of a sudden something else comes that you really hadn't thought of, or it seems to come from somewhere else. New opportunities just find themselves, and you notice them because you're in a frame of mind where you feel like you're doing something because you choose to, not because you have to do it out of desperation. And that frame of mind leaves you open to other things that you just never would have thought of. So it's a good tool to remember when things feel kind of bankrupt, just to find some sort of sense of choice again and work from that point of view. And it can be incredibly energizing and kind of miraculous sometimes. Okay, where am I? So this was kind of like, a kind of a continuation of that thought that, Peyton kind of pointed out to me that in most situations, there's almost always a functional and a dysfunctional option. So there's always a choice to be made. And you can either, choose personal powers, or you can take your chances with dysfunction, but it's probably not going to work out for you. And so I think in a way, what this is trying to say is that this process never stops. Almost all situations require that a choice be made, how to address decisions, an understanding that you can choose one or the other, and to really be aware of the dangers of choosing a dysfunctional option. Another really common dysfunctional option that wasn't discussed here is kicking something down the road. We all know that one, right? Just postponing something indefinitely. And we say, oh, we'll deal with this later, but we all kind of know that what we're really saying is we're not going to deal with this, So that's another very common dysfunctional strategy, is just delaying. And that actually is a tool that sometimes a manager can use to their advantage, because if somebody is, confronting you with something and it's kind of not appropriate, you can kind of thwart them by kicking it down the road and injecting dysfunction into what they're trying to do. And that kind of kills it right there. Okay, so these are, this is kind of like the positive side now, that in terms of choosing functionality. I think we all know that you can create magic, because you're bringing together a lot of talents. And when those talents are brought into connection to the structure of the group, it can be quite magical, because things will happen that are unexpected. And the way that you can really encourage this is that, carefully observe the people that are working with you and discover their strengths. Because a lot of times they themselves don't know their own strengths. Some people do, but a lot of people don't. And by focusing on those strengths and pointing them out to people, you're teaching them to focus on, what can work. And you can really delight people by seeing a strength in them that they themselves didn't even see. And it's kind of a wonderful experience for somebody. And that's very important. I found that one of my most powerful tools when I was managing was, that I really studied people very closely as individuals and let them know what I saw in them that was like really beautiful and useful and unique to them. And almost everybody has it, even the people that are unpleasant. It is really useful for the team to make a point. It feels kind of dorky, but it works to regularly take time to review your assets and accomplishments, because when you do that, you're creating momentum for more to happen, and to keep a sense of choice. So when you make plans and decisions, do them through the process of feeling choice, not a feeling of something you have to do. So you're continuing always to engage people's creative talents and then taking time to stop and appreciate those. And when it's easy to overlook the importance of the structure of the organization, because it's kind of a, I don't know, it's kind of a tedious thing, but it is actually the engine that keeps everything working. And when people are asked to do that, to comply, they begin to feel the power of the organization behind them and can release their creativity. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about if you have a group of people that come with an idea of like, oh, I want to, I don't know, like we had an intern once, and out of the blue, he suddenly said, I want to hold a book sale. It's like a book sale, but he was like, no, I want to do that. So that's it's like, okay, if that's something you think you can do, this is how you're going to do it together with us. These are the ground rules. These are the things that you can say about us in public. This is who you're going to work with. This is who we want you to check in with. Just told him the structure of how the organization worked. And once he got that, okay, now do your thing, like, as long as you follow these basic, steps, the rest is yours, dude, do your thing. And I was amazing. He raised a lot of money. He actually did it. And then actually cleaned the whole building to boot to prepare for it, which was amazing that somebody wanted to clean our building. He got rid of all the junk in it. But it turned out that people in our town, they don't want to do a lot of things, but they do want to donate books, apparently. And so we got 1 million books and sold them all and made a lot of money. So that was his vision, and he had total freedom to do it as long as he understood the parameters, the boundaries within which to do it. He discovered a lot about himself in the process, and had a great time. So, structure is not about constraining people. It's about giving them the ground rules so they can go off and be themselves, So, the points on the right are ways that you do that. You have brainstorming discussions so that they understand the organization. They're asked to run new ideas through the group. Communication doesn't have to be heavy-handed, and casual communication is usually best. the organization to have clear mission statement and boilerplate language so that when somebody like this wants to go off and organize a book sale, they know how to speak on behalf of the organization. You keep your protocols in place and make plans and express appreciation, publicly acknowledge somebody when they're doing work like this. And often somebody who has kind of taken this kind of initiative and worked with you ends up being a model for other people. And so they act as a bridge because they show other people that it's safe, that's safe to do this. And that they're going to get a reward. One of the things that Peyton used to always say to me was, everybody wants to know two things. They want to know, where is it safe and where do I get paid? And so, the safety is in getting the support of the structure behind them and being given the ground rules, and the payment is public or whatever kind of recognition they want. And again, if they don't do it that way, if they don't work through the capacity of the group, which means following its protocols and its way of working, the biggest cost usually is that they put out a whole lot of effort and fail. And you just don't want that as a manager. You don't want people experiencing that. Because that's usually what happens. Usually nothing comes of it. So that's so functionality is a beautiful thing. And thank you. Like I said, these concepts were concepts from Peyton. And probably each of these concepts could, I could spend hours and hours talking about, because they're so interesting and incredibly effective. But let me stop here and get your responses and any questions you have. I'll end up with one thing that was a very interesting thing that Peyton once said to me. And it's turned out that he's right about this. Because, a lot of times people misbehave, they make unfair accusations. They do a lot of things to managers, right? And because in a weird sort of way, a manager is a parental figure very often, and a lot gets put on that role. But Peyton said, a lot of stuff you really don't have to respond to. And, even if you feel threatened by that. And I said, well, why not? And he said, because in a system, in a social system, which this is, everybody actually knows what's going on. We're all basically made of the same stuff as human beings. And even if nobody is admitting it, everybody knows what's happening. He said, even the dog knows. So Stephanie, even Bella knows. And whether it's said out loud or not, they know already. And so you don't have to talk about it. You just have to respond to the reasons why it's happening. But excuse me, I have to take this call real quick. Heather, can I call you back in about an hour? Okay, thanks. And that's a really interesting concept, but he's right. I've tested it out. There have been times when, I've been called in front of a board meeting at Pacifica and really really unfair accusations were made. And Peyton would say to me, you don't have to respond to that. Just stay within your own authority, which is, what you do well. That you're a nice person. That you mean well. You're good at your job. Just stay that person, because they all know. They all know what's going on. They all know that it's unfair, even though nobody's saying it, which would be nice if somebody would say it, but they know it. And it gives you a kind of a certain freedom to kind of remember that, because it just doesn't make everything. I mean, we all would like to be right, but it makes the air we breathe just a little bit easier to breathe, to remember that even when people are, misbehaving, they ultimately actually know what's going on, and that it doesn't always have to be identified for what it is out in public, because identifying it doesn't make that much difference, because people love to argue with each other, but ultimately it will play itself out, the fact that everybody understands what's happening. So I'll leave with that. I mean, there's there's lots more that we could talk about, but this is all a lot of different kind of concepts. So I'm interested in your responses to it. What do you think?
Well, this was a large iceberg of information. Wow, I just feel like it's a lot to think about. And there's like so many good moments that you talked about. Trying to just like figure out where to start. Is there any moments that stuck out for people that you really resonated with?
I thought the whole thing was really helpful, and it just, for me, it just keeps reminding me to go back and visit policies and structure, and it's really helpful to hear. And it's a really hard position to be in, running a community station, and because you really do expose yourselves to everyone and everything. And it makes us vulnerable. And it's a tricky position to be in. One of the tools somebody gave me recently was a really well thought out idea form. Because when sometimes a lot of people have ideas, they're not really well thought out how to execute them, and how they fit into the strategic plan of the station. Or this form, I could share it with the group, but it's just nice to have. I haven't used it yet, but the person who gave it to me told me that they had some challenging people that had a lot of ideas, and so that she created this form and would give it to people with these ideas about how to change things or improve or whatever. And she never got one of them returned, but it was something to kind of throw the ball back in someone else's court and hear them, but also ask them for sort of more details how it would actually work, because it's easy to have ideas and expect someone else to do it. But that's one of the things that come up. But anyway, thank you for the presentation. It was really, really nice to hear. And I look forward to watching it again to just refresh.
So, I mean, in a way, what you're doing is you're trying to bring their energy into the structure of the organization. Yeah. And it's true that a lot of times when I'm going to mute you because I think there's an echo. Yeah, that got really weird. Anyway, sorry to mute you. but and you can kind of use that in a dark way too, because a lot of times if somebody, comes into the organization and has all these ideas and wants somebody else to do them, a really great way to get rid of somebody that you don't want around is to give them work to do. And they will usually leave because once they have to actually do real work, they don't necessarily want to do that. So it is a strategy actually for kind of containing somebody who's, creating a lot of trouble, is to actually give them work, which is kind of a darker version of what you're saying. But, you're right. That's like a way for them to be brought into the structure and then see what happens. Marie, I'm going to mute myself so that you can talk without an echo.
Ursula, that was a really good presentation. I saw myself in a number of situations that you mentioned, and I'm questioning how I've presented things and done things. When you were talking about culture, boy, that really hit home, because I've had a volunteer or people who were interested in the radio station, and they caught on to the culture by the end of the second community meeting, and brought some things up, and I was surprised that they saw that as quickly as I, who had been with the station for a little bit. As far as organization and ways of doing things to do, I got a broadcast. I graduated from college with a BA in broadcasting, and I pushed the structure of a commercial station here, or I'll bring up the way things were done. We have a few people who have worked at radio stations, a number of at commercial stations, a number of people who've worked as student DJs or on-air people in colleges. And the majority, I think, Ursula, you mentioned this, are people who don't have any kind of background in broadcasting. And in my thinking, there are the structure and the way of doing things, the community in the commercial broadcast, at least the station that I worked at, I thought worked very well and made sense. And I wrestle with my way of thinking that things work well with people who don't have that experience. And I often don't know how much to push my way with others who don't have the experience of operating a commercial, a business. That's about all I have to say, but I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I had something to add in addition to appreciating so much all of those great tools. I think that was really hits home for me in a lot of ways. This is something just recently that it was pointed out in a meeting that I had with Sally Kane, the importance of having a grievance policy. And I was speaking to one of my HR friends about that. And they suggested, instead of calling it a grievance policy, to call it an open door policy, and still have the same, like, this is who you go to try to resolve the situation, and then here, and it stops with the general manager or whatever. But, just reframing things like that with a positive term rather than grievances. That's like the form that you talked about, Jet, that putting it into a positive spin is always going to help. So yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, and I think that the word grievance people will latch on to, right? And in a sense that it's a form of borrowed authority that, I have a grievance, and it invites people to borrow that authority. And kind of also the thrill and power of noncompliance. And it's interesting, in this work with Peyton, it just really changed we kind of in our culture, in movies and stuff, you always have the scene where somebody kind of says it like it is, and that's the end of the scene, right? You get the last word and you lay down, you kind of tell the truth and then everybody understands. And I just kind of really came to fully appreciate how in most situations that's not at all what's going to happen, because everybody's got their truth, and you're kind of inviting an argument when you take on that kind of I guess it's kind of a form of borrowed authority, where you're kind of acting like the star of a movie and you're telling everybody what's, how things should be, and that that it's really worth it in the long run to take the time to put a process in place where these underlying issues are addressed in casual and, non-powerful terms, so that nobody's like, closing down the scene with their monologue, but you're building a structure. It's really the structure that's the star of a radio station, not anybody's ability to appear powerful. And I also kind of came to realize that, this is, in a weird sort of way, this is it's management a little bit as a almost like a spiritual practice. It's finding the center in yourself to connect with what's really making things happen instead of what feels good, to feel sense of power as a manager. And sometimes it can take quite a while, sometimes turning an issue like this around can be a very quiet and continuous process of holding somebody very subtly and gently accountable until it no longer becomes worth it to them to do what they're doing. And it can be a very quiet and almost casual process, where, you as the manager aren't seen as a particularly powerful person. And that kind of sucks, because when you're a manager, so much gets directed at you that is unfair. And that's just kind of the job, but it's in a way, it's in a weird sort of way, it's much more fun, because you begin to really see people and see what's moving them. And it's a different type of power, it's a power to connect to what really makes things work, and what really does make things work. And that's kind of a very beautiful private pleasure. Doesn't mean it'll always end well for you, but it is a great thing to experience anyway. So I guess, I kind of learned the power of what is not being said as well as what's said. James?
Yeah, my partner and I, as a station, are going through the NSAB's circle of engagement process. And one of the models, we went through strategy development at first. That was introducing how, what you need to do to form strategies on how to run your station. We're starting pretty much at the bottom. We don't have a huge bureaucracy and huge job assignments or anything. We just have volunteers. And so we're studying the model of the sociocracy model, which is kind of shared governance in a way, rather than top down, although there obviously has to be a structure. Anyway, we're getting now to the part where how do you handle difficult things, difficult people, and or difficult issues. And so we're going to hit that module next time in about a week. So I'm going to be very interested into seeing how what you've presented jives what they have presented, what they present. And the other thing I just want to quickly mention is some of you may know a psychologist named Marshall Rosenberg, who's he's written a book about nonviolent communication and how to talk to people who are in crisis, or how do you deal with people on an equal level rather than talking down to them. And I just like to mention, he's made several recordings. Of course, he's dead now, but there's several recordings that he made about dealing with it. And it's just really mind-boggling to listen to him, because he's extremely, some of you may have heard of him. He's extremely good at diffusing potentially bad situations, and also in how do you talk to someone without talking down to them? How do you talk to children without being the parent and the authority that wants to, like the teacher who wants to assert their own superiority over their students? And it's, anyway, if some of you may want to check that out, because it's just mind-boggling how he does this. Anyway, I want to thank you for your presentation. And just lastly, we started out in 2017 with a committee of about 4 or 5 people, and 2 of the people didn't like each other, and they were extremely strong personalities.
Yeah.
And it just threw a wrench into everything. We had volunteers who were really enthusiastic about working for the station, but once they saw this toxicity, they left. So basically, those 2 people are gone, and then the pandemic hit. And so now we're kind of regrouping and trying to bring back some of the volunteers who left because they were either upset or they didn't have anything to do. I mean, we had all sorts of dysfunction going on. So we're optimistic that we can get this going again. Anyway, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm thinking that all of these things, they're tools of how we do anything, especially when you're dealing with other people, have their viewpoints, and everybody has their own viewpoints. And my mom used to say, it's easier to change. She said, always say no. You ask her something, can I do this? She'd always say no. And I said, you always say no. She said, well, I discovered that it's easier to say no. It's easier to change a no to a yes than it is a yes to a no. So, well, that makes sense. So yeah, so it's a managing tool. No, you can't do that. Well, okay, let's talk about it. Oh, okay, now I understand. Oh, okay, yes, good, let's do that. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like the power of non-compliance, but I'm not sure that's exactly what she was doing. It sounds like she was opening up a conversation with that, right?
Yeah, she just backing up. Just okay, let's talk about this. Oh, okay. Yeah, put it that way. Yeah, I can agree with that. No, you can't have those matches. No, there's absolutely not.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So she had an interesting way of managing. I think, you know, when you start out the presentation, you had the pyramid, and you had the board and the manager and the staff. And I always thinking about the board had a reason to create the station, and then they hired the manager to get them to that place. But then I find that a lot of times the boards kind of step away once they hire the manager and think, well, we hired you, you do it.
Yeah.
And then it gets fuzzy.
Yeah.
And when it gets fuzzy, then all these little fibers start growing in different directions. So it the original story has to keep on being told
Yeah,
of why we started this operation, why we started this organization, why we started this committee, what was the purpose, and what are we trying to maintain or create, or, and then
Yeah.
finding people who can listen to that story and say, huh, I think I can help.
yeah,
Or, and then you also give them the opportunity to say, really, that's what you want to do? No, I don't want to do that. And so they go off and play someplace else.
yeah,
So maybe the story needs to be retold sometimes. Maybe it,
Yeah.
maybe it's the group of people that now who maybe life situations have changed from when we first started the station way back when. And now it's completely a different situation. Well, let's regroup. What is our purpose now? Where do we want to go? We've experienced this and it's not working anymore. So how should we get together and rebuild it? And I always talk about in recent times the consensus building process, but I also understand that the consensus is also a tool.
Mhm.
And it's really a good tool to establish what is the common values of the people who are doing or coming together. And then let's build a plan on that, which is using their strengths and their imaginations and agreements. And then from that, once we have that in our mind, then we start building a trust, because we all agree upon where we're going. That's a basic trust element. And when you have that basic trust element, then you become vulnerable. You allow that. Because if you don't have the basic line of trust, then you're feeling you want to be invulnerable. You don't want to give up anything. And then you start moving away from conflicts, because
You don't know how to
just don't have,
navigate.
yeah, it gets really confusing, and then everything turns fuzzy, and then you have to start all over again.
Yeah,
Life's great, it's just a wonderful place to live. But yeah, I like I say, everything is a tool, and I like your comment says titles don't make a station. Titles don't make anything. They're just somebody's imaginations. So
Yeah.
because we all have different stories and we translate them in different ways, so we all have to come together and say, well, okay, how do we play out with this energy that we have and do the best we can to reach something that's agreeable to us. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
I'd
very
like to tag on to what Joseph was saying, if I may. Trust, absolutely. Without that, you can't be honest about what you want to say with any issues. And Joseph, you were talking about everyone understanding what the station is about, the history, why people wanted to do that, pursue that. And I think it is Chapman College in Orange, California, might have been the first community radio station in the nation. But at any rate, they had a handbook that had a pretty good story about the station and its purpose. It was a story. It was more than a mission statement. And without repeating, this history is a problem in the United States, because in our economic system, we forget what's happened in the past, or that story isn't passed along, and then government does the same damn thing and gets into the same problems that we face today. And I feel that part of the downfall with unions is, again, that story not being carried through to new members so that they can pass that on to fellow workers who are ambivalent about whether unionizing is the thing to do. Story and the struggles, what people gave up in their lives to provide what they have today, is not anything that they know about. And as new members or new people who are wondering about what a community station is, whether or not they want to become involved, I think that the story of the station should be part of a packet that you have for anyone coming into a community meeting, and remind that story on occasion to the volunteers who have been with the station for a while. We have a really big lapse of memory in this country.
Chronically, yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting what both of you are saying. I think the problem with trust is that that's a really elusive thing, because we have a lot of reasons not to trust each other. And I guess that's why I like the DAISY model. Really, I see it as a further development of the idea of consensus, because what I see the problem with consensus with most of us, and I don't know, Joseph, if this applies to your community because you have a different history than we do, but I see for most Americans, the consensus model is interpreted as really kind of only that outside circle. And in other words, it's a process where a whole lot of individuals have to come to agreement with each other. And there are so many reasons for us not to agree on things always as humans, that it's a very, very difficult thing to do that can really frustrate people. So what I see that with that DAISY model, as I see as kind of a further development of that, because I think the missing piece in that, in terms, which you're calling trust, Marie, but I see that as an understanding of everybody that the organization itself is really the organizing factor, not the individuals. And that's kind of like where, telling the history comes in, because it asserts the organization itself as an energy, as a tradition, right? That has its own meaning. And that when that is seen as in the center of it, then as the thing that holds people together, then the individuals are kind of freed from having to find reasons to agree with each other, because they all can agree on the organization instead. And so it kind of frees them up to be different or whatever, as long as they all can it gives them something to agree on, which is the organization itself. Now, I know that's easier said than done, because people argue about what the organization is, but I think just the understanding that the organization itself as an entity is an organizing factor that needs to be respected kind of changes the conversation in consensus a little bit. Because I see the problem with consensus is people very often go into it simply as an individual and just arguing for their limitations or their rights or whatever they themselves are experiencing, and they're not kind of transferring some of that to being accountable to the organization itself. So then you get into this struggle that you're talking about between people wanting authority, but not the accountability, right? So I'm going to be a board member and I'm going to make all these decisions, but I'm not going to be accountable to actually seeing how to do it, right? And so there's that lack of accountability there. So I don't know, that's why I like the DAISY idea, because it puts that organization right in the middle, and then everybody's kind of freed up to be a pedal instead of having to all be one thing.
I like the DAISY model too. I think you're absolutely correct. I think that consensus is a tool, just one tool to help find that seed that makes the daisy.
Yeah.
And then the daisy is going to grow and the organization is going to be at the center, and you've got all these really nice petals that everybody's agreeing to support that. I mean, the function of every petal is in every leaf makes the plant survive. So I agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that the value of getting the people together to evaluate, I know what it is, the trusting element is the base. If you have the trust, then you will also eliminate a lot of the conflicts, or you're willing to address the conflicts. Some people have this thing, let's agree to disagree. That's an issue of avoiding conflict. And if you avoid the conflict, then you don't resolve the issue. It just festers. So it is another step in the pyramid to get to, I don't even know why it's called a pyramid, because that gives the image of there's something at the top and that is in control, but it isn't. It's the accountability has to happen, will happen if there's trust, and then there's a willingness to address the conflicts, and then there will be the ability to evaluate and without fear of making hard decisions.
Yeah.
And eventually what will happen is you take the ego out. It's the willingness to say, okay, has to be a guiding factor or a steering wheel that's going to allow you to steer this whole mechanism, and everybody's going to agree to ride in this thing.
Yeah.
And put their energies into, I got some money, you need some more gas, or okay, let's get it further on down the road.
Yeah, see, I agree with you on that. I think the agreeing together is more valuable than the trust, because I think trust is a huge luxury that comes with time. Because we all know how crazy we are, and we all know how volatile we are as creatures, and that we don't know what's like in there, and I think asking people to trust each other is a very tall order that most people ultimately do not really comply with, because they know the risks of being involved with other people. But I think asking people to agree, like you said, on the mutual project or structure, I think that is a reasonable ask. And if you're lucky, with time, trust gets built around that. But it's a tall order to ask people to trust each other. I mean, I love the idea, but people
it's just something that
have turned
happens
around and done the weirdest things, at the next day, where something else was like the reason why, they had to backstab me. So I don't know, trust is difficult. Bye-bye,
Yeah,
James. Thanks
that's
for joining us.
okay.
So
Yeah,
I like what you said about everybody coming to an agreement, because I think that's where you can do something. You can ask people to agree on the you know, on the structure. That is, I think, a reasonable request. And you know, if trust grows, that's a beautiful thing. I mean, that's like gold, right?
well, yeah, it's you can. Another thing I came to my mind was you could love somebody, but not necessarily trust them. But you
Right.
can't trust somebody without loving them.
Yeah. Well, I guess.
Oh, that's what I noticed. So,
Yeah. Well,
this
thank
was-
you. Thank you so much. It's really interesting with both of you. I find it very, very interesting what you're saying, both of you. It's really, you know, from experience, right?
I love how insightful your presentation has been, and so much so that it just becomes this platform to have a great discussion about communication. I feel like you could probably give this presentation once a month, not that you should, but you probably could give it once a month, and depending on who's here and what people are thinking about that day, you could have a totally different conversation every time. It's been really cool to hear what everyone's response is. So with that, I don't know, I see we're coming up at 5, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for sticking with this. I really appreciate your sharing this time with me. It's great.
Thank
yeah, I
you.
appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph.
Everybody have a good rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
see you later. Take care.
Yeah.